The phrase, "they look fine but they're not fine," captures the central paradox of pediatric adrenal insufficiency. It is a condition defined by what is missing, specifically cortisol, which results in a body that cannot effectively respond to the basic physical and emotional demands of growing up. While most children's bodies automatically dial up hormone production to handle a math test, a growth spurt, or a game of soccer, a child with adrenal insufficiency remains at a baseline that is fundamentally inadequate for the moment. This creates a hidden exhaustion that can look like a lack of motivation to an outsider, but is actually a physiological brownout.
That description of a brownout is very accurate. Cortisol is frequently pigeonholed as just the stress hormone, but according to the Cleveland Clinic, it is a master regulator for energy metabolism, blood pressure, and even blood sugar stability. In a healthy child, cortisol levels fluctuate dynamically. During the school day, which is essentially a series of low-level stressors, early alarms, social navigation, cognitive load, the body keeps pace. But for a student with primary adrenal insufficiency, often known as Addison's disease, or the secondary and tertiary forms, that adaptive response is broken. They are operating on a fixed exogenous supply of steroids that doesn't breathe with the day's demands.
And that rigidity is exactly where the conflict starts, especially in a school environment. We saw this in the response from a mother whose child struggled for years in traditional schooling. She noted that her child was penalized for absences and misunderstood by educators who didn't see a visible disability. It raises a difficult question. How can a system built on standardized attendance and performance accommodate a student whose very biology is inconsistent? If the child looks healthy in the morning but is physically depleted by 2 p.m. because their cortisol replacement didn't cover the mental energy of a midday exam, the school often sees a behavioral issue rather than a medical one.
The research on health-related quality of life for these patients, including studies published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, confirms that the burden is heavily cognitive and emotional. It isn't just about feeling tired, it's about processing speed and memory. When cortisol is low, the brain literally struggles to function at its peak. This mother's account is heartbreaking because it shows the internal toll. When a child is told they aren't trying hard enough, or when they are denied a formal 504 plan or IEP because they don't fit a specific box, they begin to internalize that as a personal failure. They start to feel like a burden or are simply not good enough, which is a devastating weight to carry during formative years.
It seems there's a systemic failure in how we define disability. If a child's condition is invisible and episodic, the bureaucracy tends to reject it. The mother mentioned that testing didn't fully capture the daily struggle. This suggests that a one-time clinical evaluation in a quiet office doesn't reflect the reality of a noisy, hot gym class or a 6-hour school day. Why is there such a gap between the medical reality of adrenal failure and the educational support systems intended to help these kids?
It often stems from a lack of awareness about the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. Most educators understand diabetes because there's a visible tool like a glucose monitor. Adrenal insufficiency is more abstract. The article from My Adrenal Life points out that school is a form of ongoing stress. For these students, the cost of a normal day is higher than it is for their peers. The mother eventually chose homeschooling, which allowed for a flexible routine. It's telling that in an environment where the child could actually rest when their body demanded it, they didn't just survive, they thrived, eventually earning a music scholarship to college.
But that move to college introduces a whole new set of stressors. The transition to independence is a major theme in the My Adrenal Life piece. For a parent, it's a terrifying balancing act. You have to move from being the primary manager, the person tracking every dose and every symptom, to being a consultant. In the case of this mother's child, the transition to college brought back all the old ghosts: higher academic pressure, performance expectations, and the social demand of being a young adult. Even with the scholarship, the physical cost of maintaining that high level of performance is immense. The mother mentioned high medication use just to function, which carries its own long-term health risks.
That's the steroid tightrope. You need enough replacement to prevent an adrenal crisis, which is a life-threatening emergency involving a total collapse of blood pressure, but too much glucocorticoid over time leads to weight gain, bone density loss, and other metabolic issues. During puberty, this is even more complex. The Endocrine Society's clinical guidelines highlight that growth and pubertal timing can be significantly affected by both the condition and the treatment. A teenager is already dealing with a changing identity. Adding a body that feels unpredictable and a medication regimen that can alter your physical appearance is a massive psychological load.
Let's talk about that emotional release the article mentioned. It described kids who hold it together all day at school and then collapse or have an emotional breakdown at home. Parents often bear the brunt of that. It's easy to misinterpret that as moodiness or being difficult, but it's actually the result of sustained physical depletion. If you spend 8 hours pretending to be fine while your blood pressure is flagging and your brain is in a fog, home becomes the only safe place to let go. But that puts an incredible strain on family dynamics, doesn't it?
It creates a state of hypervigilance for the caregivers. The My Adrenal Life article notes that parents are often noticing patterns that even doctors miss. They are the ones tracking the subtle change in a child's skin tone or a slight slur in their speech that signals a crash is coming. This constant monitoring is exhausting. It's a form of secondary trauma. The mother's story reflects this perfectly. Even now that her child is in college, she's still advocating, still worrying about long-term health, discrimination in the workplace, and whether her child will ever truly be able to live independently without the safety net she provided.
I find it interesting that despite the child's talent and the college scholarship, the struggle remains essentially the same. The environment changed, but the lack of widespread understanding didn't. Some faculty are supportive, others are inconsistent. It suggests that our societal structures, whether they are K-12 schools or universities, are fundamentally rigid. They expect a linear output of energy. If you can't provide that, you're viewed as a liability or as someone just trying to get to a level playing field, rather than someone just trying to get to a level playing field.
Exactly. The My Adrenal Life piece frames awareness as a form of strength. It suggests that for these families, flexibility isn't just a preference, it's a survival strategy. We need to shift the conversation from what is wrong with this student to how can this environment be modified to sustain this student. The mother's story is a call for a broader definition of accommodation. It's not just about extra time on a test, it's about acknowledging that on some days the body simply cannot show up, and that shouldn't be the end of that child's potential.
There's a specific technical aspect mentioned in the references about iatrogenic adrenal insufficiency, the kind induced by medical treatments like high-dose steroids for asthma or autoimmune issues. It adds another layer of complexity because these patients often fall through the cracks even more than those with Addison's. Their bodies have been trained to stop producing cortisol because of external medication, and when that medication is tapered or stopped, the adrenal glands don't always wake up. These kids are essentially living with the same risks, but often without the same degree of diagnostic recognition or support.
And the fear of an adrenal crisis is the silent engine behind all of this. According to the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, a crisis can be triggered by something as simple as a stomach flu or a high fever. For a parent, every minor illness is a potential emergency. This is why the mother's response is so heavy with concern for the future. As her child moves into the workforce, will an employer understand why a common cold requires an emergency injection and a hospital visit? The stigma of being fragile or high maintenance is a real barrier to the independence that these young adults are striving for.
It seems the core takeaway from both the My Adrenal Life article and the mother's response is that adrenal insufficiency is not just a medical diagnosis. It's a lens through which an entire family views the world. It's a condition that forces a premature maturity on the child who must learn to read their body's internal signals with a precision most adults never achieve. They have to know when to push and when to stop in a world that only rewards pushing.
The article uses a beautiful phrase, different does not mean less whole. The goal for these kids isn't to be normal in the sense of matching the frantic pace of their peers. The goal is to build a life that respects their limits while allowing their talents, like the music in this child's case, to flourish. This mother's transition to homeschooling wasn't a retreat. It was an act of radical adaptation. It allowed her child to reclaim their sense of self-worth from a system that was inadvertently destroying it.
It also highlights the necessity of the parent as an expert. In rare diseases, the parent often knows more about the day-to-day management than the general practitioner or the school nurse. That can lead to friction with authority figures who feel their expertise is being challenged. But as we see in this story, that parental intuition is often what keeps the child safe and moving forward. The mother's advocacy is a full-time job that doesn't end when the child turns 18.
There's also the issue of the social cost. The article touches on how these teens might cancel plans or leave early during the years when social belonging is everything. Being the one who can't stay out late or who can't handle a hot day at the beach can lead to profound isolation. It's another invisible layer of the condition. You're not just managing hormones, you're managing your identity and your relationships against a backdrop of physical uncertainty.
And yet, there is resilience there. The My Adrenal Life piece notes that these children often develop a heightened awareness and a different kind of maturity. They are navigating a complex medical reality, while their peers are just worried about who's sitting with home at lunch. That perspective is a strength, even if it's a strength born of necessity.
But that resilience shouldn't be an excuse for the lack of systemic support. The mother's frustration with the denial of formal support plans is a common theme. We need to move toward a model of energy-informed education and employment. If we can accommodate physical mobility with ramps and elevators, we should be able to accommodate metabolic variability with flexible scheduling and remote options. This isn't just about one child, it's about how we value different types of bodies and different ways of existing in the world.
The mother's story is a powerful reminder that the medical is personal. Behind every lab result and every medication dosage is a child trying to find their place and a parent trying to hold the world steady for them. It's a journey of constant recalibration. One moment you're celebrating a scholarship, and the next you're terrified because the college health center doesn't understand the urgency of a cortisol injection. It's a life lived in the in-between, between healthy and sick, between independent and reliant.
That's why resources like the My Adrenal Life article are so vital. They provide a roadmap for the emotional side of the condition, which is often neglected in clinical settings. They tell parents that it's okay to feel uneven, and they tell the kids that their limits aren't failures. It's about building a community of awareness so that the phrase, "they look fine," is followed by an understanding of what is actually happening beneath the surface.
We've explored how adrenal insufficiency isn't just a hormone deficiency, but a condition that reshapes education, family life, and the very concept of independence. For the families navigating this, the struggle is often invisible, but the resilience is profound. If this conversation brought a new perspective to light, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing this story.